Good morning, lovely people around the world. I'm so much happy to welcome you to the first episode of Yes Education Podcast. In today's episode, we are happy to have the man who inspires me so much, the man who has been talking, teaching, learning for so many years in the field of science. We have Dr. Michael Harvey in our midst, all the way from New Zealand. Mr. Michael, good morning from Ghana.
Yes, good evening here from Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Thank you very much. So today, the topic for our discussion is going to be based on AI, the future of education, artificial intelligence. Please, can you introduce yourself in a more minute to our audience?
Well, first, thank you for the introduction, but we do have a saying in New Zealand, ka ore te kumara e korero mō tōna akarika, which basically says the sweet potato does not say how sweet it is. Yeah, so I'm not that sweet. I'm sure the audience will realise that my success is bestowed not just on me, but on others as well. But one thing we do in New Zealand is something called a pepeha, which basically is an introduction of where I'm from. So I'd like to share that kind of cultural understanding here on the podcast. So ko Titarangi a te moanga. So Titarangi is my mountain. Ko Turanganui a kiwa te moana. So Turanganui a kiwa is my water. Poverty Bay on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand. Ko Waipoa te awa, so the Waipoa River is my river. Ko Ngāti Pakiha te iwi, so I'm a European based in New Zealand. Ko Manatoki te marae, so Manatoki, which is about 10 kilometres from Gisborne City, is my meeting house. Ko Harvey tako whānau, and ko Michael tako ingoa, so Michael Harvey is my name. Yeah. So presently.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction.
Indeed. Yes, at present, I'm based at Marlborough Boys College, where I'm teacher in charge of physics and also director of esports this year as well. I've taken that on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So now the ball is in your court to share with our audience AI, the future of education. I know you have been working so much with MED and other tools to promote education around the world in the field of science. And my audience can't wait to listen to your great ideas on how AI can help us, or AI, the future of education.
Yes, well, artificial intelligence is something that I've been discussing a lot with something called the Ed3 DAO, which is actually a group of educators who are on the metaverse. Okay, so what is the metaverse? It's a kind of buzzword at the moment. Basically, it's the internet where we just connect in a virtual space. So yeah, and we've been discussing how artificial intelligence will be affecting education. And these are conversations that I've been having also with my head of department. He's very interested in artificial intelligence as well. And it's going to be changing things. So I guess in 5 ways, in summary, ways that artificial intelligence will change education, maybe for the good, maybe for the worse. We don't know yet. We live for the future. But the first one I would suggest is personalizing education. So basically, the artificial intelligence, or a computer program, basically, the algorithm, will help to determine what the student doesn't know or does know. It builds basically a personalized schedule for that individual learner, kind of considering what the student does and doesn't know first. So filling in those knowledge gaps. So you actually, basically the AI is tailoring the student's specific needs. And I won't go into the details, but it's around the idea of knowledge space theory, but that's a bit complex probably for this podcast. But basically the algorithm learns what the student's gaps of knowledge is, and then it kind of develops the learning pathway in order to kind of direct the learner and personalize the learning process for that student. That's one way.
Okay.
Yeah. So a second possible way is for teachers be able to produce smart content. So that's the idea of digital lessons. Okay, so you've got digital textbooks and learning interfaces, which again can be helped with the use of artificial intelligence. So the idea is that the work is done by the artificial intelligence, not the teacher. The teacher's just kind of finessing it. Being able to visualize information in different ways through maybe web-based study environments, also powered through artificial intelligence, and also learning content updates. So it's basically how the learner can be developed in terms of their content, depending on the individual learners and also the kind of community they're in. For teachers, again, third thing is contributing to task automation, so doing things like learning management system. The information's coming in, the big data, and the learning management system then can create basically summaries for each individual student, so the teacher can focus on those students in terms of feed forward and feedback. And you've also, the fourth thing can be about maybe AI-powered chatbots, so the students can create those themselves, and they can actually help other students if they're having trouble in their learning. So it designs the chatbots to answer questions which questions students commonly find challenging, and that's actually where you got content creation for the students rather than just consuming information. And then you've also got the access for special needs, for example, for students, and that's where you come into a concept called universal design for learning, where you're actually designing the learning with the idea of thinking about how students are going to interact with the information and kind of create different avenues to show their learning, which can be helped again by artificial intelligence. So that's kind of summarizing basically 5 major areas where I think artificial intelligence might be the future, or well, will be the future actually. I don't think it might be, will be the future of education.
Thank you very much for this great insight. So artificial intelligence is going to sort of help teachers and learners to improve the way we learn in the classroom, to make things easier, from my understanding of what you're saying. Now, coming back to
it is the dream.
Yeah,
that's
the
hope
dream.
that it's the dream. Yes.
Yeah. So back in the usage of internet and now advancing in the use of the internet, way back here in Ghana, we have the challenge of accessibility. What is going to be the challenge? Because computers or smartphones are not all over the world. Some communities around the world have difficulties in accessing all these things. And then now that artificial intelligence is growing little by little in some developed countries, what are some of the effects down to the developing countries?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because I think actually the continent of Africa is actually at an advantage because the first world countries like the United States and in Europe, they already have core infrastructure that they have to change in order to adapt to Web 3.0. So essentially Web 3.0 is a new iteration in the internet coming from Web 2.0, obviously, where it's going to be actually individuals creating the content and actually owning the content as well. And I think that's actually turning it around. That's where the continent of Africa actually has an advantage because they don't have to change the infrastructure because they're building it from scratch. So I would actually turn that around and say the lack of connectivity, surprisingly, might actually be an advantage, not a disadvantage, for the changes coming in digital technology and education.
Thank you very much. So in your field of science, do you see AI going to help the field of science so much that teaching and learning of the sciences? Because I myself, I was afraid to be a scientist because of the chemistry and the physics. I love biology, but the chemistry where you have to work so much of the coding. How is it going to incorporate the teaching of the sciences in the class?
Well, particularly in science. I mean, in science, we deal with large numbers of data sets. And the advantage of artificial intelligence, if the algorithm is correct, and that's always a big if, is that it allows the human to be actually developing the inferences from the data. So the data number crunching, the artificial intelligence does that, and then you've got the human there actually analyzing the data. So rather than the computer taking our job, which is a major fear we seem to have, the artificial intelligence and the human are actually working together in tandem, because there's things that humans can do that artificial intelligence doesn't. So artificial intelligence runs an algorithm. It has no idea of ethics. It has no idea of morality. And that's where the human can come in and say, well, that's an ethical thing to do. It's making those creative jumps that artificial intelligence cannot do.
Thank you very much. So coming back again to this question, if you look at Africa, I'm using Africa because I've based so much in Africa, Ghana, and last I had the privilege to travel to Gambia. Some teachers have difficulty or don't know how to use computers. And we are talking about AI, the future of education. How? What are the ideas that we are also going to put in place to help migrate all these teachers on the internet?
Yeah, well, I think the idea of the mindset, and I don't think is actually unique to the content of Africa, it is actually letting the learners start to direct the learning. It's the idea that maybe you aren't the smartest person in the room anymore, and you can actually use, the students as your tool. I mean, that's the case with me in Minecraft. So Minecraft's an example of the metaverse. I don't really know what's going on half the time, but I have faith in the students that they know what they're doing. So I'm actually learning from them. So it's actually also changing the dynamic of the classroom, which is not necessarily technology, but I think it's actually a mindset of a teacher. So we have the phrase here in New Zealand, the tūkana taina. So the tūkana taina is a model where you've got teacher and student. And traditionally in a traditional classroom, that the teacher is the one up front. But when you're looking at that model, you could have a 12-year-old student in your class who could be the expert in Minecraft, and he or she becomes the teacher. So it's actually changing the mindset of being a lifelong learner as an educator as well, and taking the risk that you get and maybe have to learn from your students.
Yeah. So that brings about the power of collaboration in the classroom, where teacher doesn't just take the role to be the leader, but give the opportunity to the students to explore or to grow the leadership skills in the students by inviting the student to take the role as a teacher, and then the teacher also sit back and learn from the student. Because teaching, from my understanding, is give and take affair between the teacher and his or her students, so that, as you said, a student might be good in Minecraft or good in something that the teacher might not have the knowledge to on that subject. So that is so powerful. Thank you, Michael. So we are still on AI, the future of education, artificial intelligence. Can you go a little bit deeper, because it's something that is growing in our world, and I'm proud to be privileged to be part of the Internet of Things Association here in Ghana. And in some of our next episodes, we are going to interview the president of IoT Ghana in our podcast. AI, what is the influence of, what influence AI in our community?
Well, that's a very big thing. I mean, artificial intelligence is affecting us at all times. So it's basically how governments now are deciding to make policy decisions. So it's important that we take that ownership back from artificial intelligence as well. Because we've also got to be careful in education. So these are the ideas of, like, it will be the future, but we've got to be certain that it's the future we want. And I make the delineation between big data and small data. So big data is just your exam results, okay, for example, of a student. So you get a student in front of you now, and it's just essentially he or she is a number. But you've also got to consider small data, and that's actually developing a personal relationship with every individual student. Because, I mean, I've discussed how you can personalize the learning, but without that human connection, learning does not happen. So it's the power of relationships. So it's actually the artificial intelligence working in tandem. But in terms of society at the moment, we tend to be just focusing on that raw data and not really considering about the individuals themselves, and not looking at the minutiae of that the importance of those human interactions. We saw that in the COVID epidemic. We had the use of digital technologies, zooming in, as I zoom in here. But a lot of my students disconnected. So even though artificial intelligence allows that personalization, you've also got to have that human connection as well.
Thank you very much, Michael. We are learning with Dr. Michael Harvey. And as I said, he is a science teacher all the way from New Zealand. He has been teaching for years. Michael, let's come to your field of technology. I know you are the boss of technology. When it comes to me and you, what are some of the tools that you could recommend or talk about this podcast session when it comes to AI that our learners or educators around the world can pick up to learn, to get a little idea about AI?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you two, and it's caused a lot of consternation at my school as well. So basically, we had a discussion with our heads of department, and I hope they don't hear this, but anyway, and the conversation was, we've got this new artificial intelligence coming out, and the students can basically type in a sentence and it writes the essay for them. It's known as GPT-3. Okay, and one of the head of the department basically said, okay, then we have to get rid of computers completely. We just have to go back to pen and paper. I thought that was a little bit extreme, to be honest. So it's the idea of actually changing the way we assess as well. So the two tools I would think are very interesting, especially in English, are the tools of GPT-3, which is an AI bot that actually creates digital writing, okay, writes essays, and that actually challenges the way we assess. I may have a possible solution for that. And the other ones are two ones I look at is DALL-E 2 and also Midjourney. And both of those, that you give a written prompt and it creates digital artwork from it. And in both cases, so the DALL-E 2 Midjourney, it's quite a powerful tool to get the students to create creative writing from an image, because basically they get the image now in front of them because they've typed in the key term, and they can create a short story from that. It's a primer for creativity. And they can also start adjusting and using just that as a starting point to develop their images if they're doing art, for example. And the essay is, I think, a good way to critique writing styles. So I think that's where the assessment comes in. Rather than getting students just to write essays, you're actually now saying, well, here is an essay written by a artificial intelligence bot. How can you improve on that? How can you critique that? What makes you think it might be written for an artificial intelligence bot? It's actually using it as a tool again to actually bring in the humanity of the learning rather than just a raw, just writing an essay. So I think both of them are very powerful tools, especially in the visual arts and written arts. And I think that's where the power of artificial intelligence lies, in that particular space.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we talk about the science and then the languages. Let's come to the field of art, where we need to create designs or images or scribe something. How is artificial intelligence going to help in the art industry?
Yeah, I think that's where these because basically what happens is that the more people that are making images on these online artificial intelligence algorithms, this is where the machine learning comes in. So the more data you get in, the more you can fine tune your responses. And I think that for the arts, again, that creates a visual prompt to kind of, because a lot of students say, well, I can't draw, or I can't, I have no creativity. I'm not a creative person. But by using those written prompts to create artwork, it actually can be a seed to actually create that creativity, and it can move on from there. It's the iteration. And you can also work in groups if you're working in design, and using these as initial prompts to actually further develop creativity in the classroom. I think that's a very powerful tool, both DALL-E 2 and basically most of the open AI platforms for generating digital art.
Thank you so much. So my last question to you, if we are to vote for AI inclusive in education, AI excluding in education, where will your vote be?
Well, obviously I'm going to say inclusive, but there's always going to be caveats, because we've really got to make sure that we're not just using the tool for the tool's sake. There are sound pedagogical reasons as to why we're using these tools. And that's where I think we've got to really reconsider how we assess learning and what we see learning as being in the classroom. So I think that's where the challenge might actually lie.
Thank you, Michael, for making time with us at Yes Education Podcast. You say, we talk, you listen. That is our slogan. We do the talking, and our audience do the listening. And one thing I want to say about Michael, so Michael is an ambassador for Flip, Wakelet, Mesh, You, Minecraft, a whole lot of platforms. I can go on and go on and go on. So if you want to learn more from Michael, you can follow him on Twitter and Facebook. On Twitter, his handle is Dr._Harvey on Twitter. Go there, search for him, follow him, and you learn more from him. Michael, your last word for our audience today.
No, it's ngā mihi nui, which is thank you very much for this opportunity to be the first ever podcast, the Youth Education Podcast. So thank you for that. Artificial intelligence can be intimidating because we've already seen all the Terminator movies. But I think it's something we do have to embrace, but we do need to be aware of it in order to control it, which I guess is also something we learned from the Terminator movies. But yeah, it's a powerful tool, but make sure that the pedagogy always drives the tool, not the other way around. Yeah.
So on behalf of the team from Yes Education Podcast, we say a big thank you to Dr. Harvey for taking time from your busy schedule to be the first person on our podcast today. And we are so privileged to have you on our podcast.
Thank you.